Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Hema Ramkissoon, and this is the Morning Brew. Well, we're understanding trauma, its effect on our children. So it's not only about understanding what trauma is, but what's happening to the nation's children in terms of the intervention for adolescents and the youth of Trinidad and Tobago. Joining us on set now, Hanif Benjamin. He is a clinical therapist and a trauma specialist. Good morning, Hanif. How are you?
I am well, Hema. Thank you for having me again.
Now, we're looking at understanding trauma and the impact on children. Let's give some examples. What exactly is classified as trauma or traumatic experience?
Any event that has impacted one's life negatively, anything that has happened out of the ordinary, something that, someone is dealing with that they cannot function through their emotions and or their behaviors.
Now, looking at the impact on our nation's youth, what is classified as a traumatic event for them? And I want to ask specifically, there was a story in the newscast about bullying, a story about a very horrific tale that was basically carried in one of the news stations and a newscast. A young child, victim of bullying, sexual assault. But, classification of the act of bullying, because a lot of people will say that it's just children acting out, boys will be boys, girls will be girls. What is the difference with, children being children and the act of bullying and that becoming a traumatic experience?
I think, unfortunately, for quite some time, we have been dealing with this rite of passage where boys are to be beaten and or engage in some fight, and we are perpetuating the fact that they are being normal, and there's absolutely nothing normal about being beaten, and it affects people for some time to come. And we are seeing the effects of that in our schools right now. And in that same newscast that you spoke about, the mother spoke about, she saw changes in the child behavior that she thought was normal. But unfortunately, she is now understanding that that is the effects of trauma, of the abuse and the bullying that has been perpetrated.
Now, I know that with the St. Michael's home, and this story is one which I think a lot of people, a 14-year-old child lost his life. They've determined the cause of death. But the story with this child, who this child is, and this child was saved from a situation before that, then taken back to the home and then returned to St. Michael's. And now this child is no more.
I think what that speaks to is a country that is failing to protect our children. I think the fact that any children should end up in a home speaks to the fact that we as adults have failed our children and continues to so do. We have to take into account why these children are being sent to any home. What is being done with the families? What is being done in the schools, in the community? Why it is that we feel as if homes are our last resort? And what is being done to prevent children from going to these homes?
Now, looking at the fact of what's being done in the nation's homes, this child obviously was in a traumatic experience, and we all know the story now. It's in the public domain. The child was rescued from a dog kennel. That is what the caregivers at that time chose as a form of discipline for the child. Obviously returned to the family. The effects of that were probably not dealt with, and then ended up in the St. Michael's home for boys. How do we then effectively discipline our children? But we do have to take a very, very short break. When we come back, we will have more for you on this discussion, trauma and our children. Stay with us. Welcome back to Trinidad and Tobago. We are continuing our discussion on trauma, its effect on our youth. If trauma is not effectively dealt with, what kind of results will we see?
We are seeing it today. We are seeing behaviors in our children and adolescents and in our adults. And these are direct result of traumatic incidents that have not been properly dealt with. And or children who believe that they are in fact dealing with it appropriately based on what they see the adults doing. You see, so we have to then understand that if we are not providing proper intervention from an early age when trauma has happened, our children are going to be behaviorally dysregulated and or emotionally dysregulated.
Some parents say that they cannot deal with their children, that any sort of situation, there are events where a mother will tell you. There was a situation where I actually showed the video of a school fight, and one of the mothers contacted me and said, I cannot control this child. I really just cannot control this child. What then do you do?
The question becomes, at what point did this child become uncontrollable? When did things go from good to bad? What caused things moving from good to bad? And that is what we need to address. You see, parents have to some degree relish their responsibilities because of busy lives and all that to different things. And unfortunately, behaviors escalate. People don't wake up in the morning and decide to be bad. It is a progression over time. And the question for us is, as a clinical therapist, how are we dealing with that progression? And is it then that our parents are unable, and our school? Because you also have to understand that children spend most of their waking moments in a school.
Are we depending on the schools to solve situations which should be dealt with at the home? Are we depending on the government and the institutions to fix problems that are parenting problems?
Unfortunately, I think it's a codependence. Right? I think it's a codependence. Everyone has a responsibility, and everyone needs to understand their responsibility and how to effect it. And only when people understand that level of responsibility and take that seriously, then we will see. You see, children leave home with behaviors and going to school, then the schools are not addressing behaviors, and the children are then going back home with the behaviors into the community, and we saw the effects, the fights in the community, the brawls we have in the classrooms, and it is almost like a mirror of what goes on in our home and or in our schools. So every different level, government on a policy level, teachers on a more intimate level, and or parents on a more involved level.
I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, Hanif, but if you look at a situation where parents themselves come into the schools and deal with the teacher, and they themselves protect and propel that sort of behavior and say, well, you know, if you're hit back, defend yourself. And you see parents going to deal with other parents and parents going to deal with the teachers. How then, why do we expect the government to fix a situation when parents themselves are uncontrollable?
Oh, don't get me, I'm not saying that government needs to fix, because unfortunately, we have different levels. We have our policy level, right? But what I'm saying is, in our homes, and our children's behavior are a mirror of what society is. And what you are saying is indeed correct. But because when you look at a child's behavior, chances are that behavior is mirrored from someone, somewhere. But everyone here has a level of responsibility, though.
The impact of television shows and the impact of a culture of violence and a culture of sex on our nation's children.
That also, again, and that is where our children are being babysat. Through our television. And when you look at some of these television shows, there are some television shows right now that is only women, and the behaviors and the way they solve their problem is through fight and cuss and denigration of a person. And that is what our children is seeing now. When we look at the way people dress and they interact on television, that is what is being perpetrated in our society. So I'm quite surprised why we as adults are surprised at our children's behavior. One, because they are traumatized through sexual abuse, through domestic violence, and through physical abuse, as well as they are seeing adult people behave in ways that are not right.
And why are girls acting out? You look at a lot of the fights that are ending up on social media, and it's a lot of female students.
One, I think our girls are also on the receiving end of trauma that is not being dealt with. They are frustrated because, quite frankly, we are concentrating a lot on the boys. A lot of emphasis is played on the boys, but we don't realize that we have girls in gangs. We don't understand that we have girl gangs. We don't understand that girls are fighting for prominence, right? So while we are concentrating or are concentrating heavily on the boys, we are neglecting to understand that our girls so too need help. And they are now imploding, and their behavior is now escalating.
To a mother and a father who may suspect that their child is being bullied in the nation's schools, what are some of the traits, what are the warning signs?
Change in behaviors.
What is that change in behavior?
Any change in behavior. I'll tell you something. No child moves from A to C just like that in one semester. No child moves from just coming home and being good and you know, to disrespectful. While I must say that teenage years can be tumultuous, we need to understand that there is a thin line between adolescent behavior and or delinquent behavior.